Stars
Podcast. This is the
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Wow. What an incredibly packed show we have in store for today. Welcome to the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast, new and returning viewers. If you are checking out the show for the first time, please make sure you subscribe, smash the like button, and leave a comment down below so we can get your thoughts on any and all material discussed on today's show. And boy, do we have quite the material to discuss today. We have two shows every Monday and Friday here exclusive to YouTube and Rumble. Each Friday we bring you wrestling reports on AEW Dynamite and a deep dive into our retro review series of NWA World Championship Wrestling and World Class Championship Wrestling. Currently we are running down the 1985 library of WCW as we begin to transition into 86 this coming January. And we are also deep diving with World Class from 1982 on up. In addition, we also have AEW Rampage and NWA Power Reports for the Monday show, in addition to article analysis of my work that I write for the Chairshot each week. In addition to that, we also have pay-per-view reports dedicated for the Monday programming. So stay posted each week for new content and material here on the FSWR channel. Got a lot to get into this week, especially with this particular Dynamite report, so let's get right into the action as the great and ever so wise Excalibur coins each show. And for those of you keeping track in the archives, this is AEW Dynamite from December 15th. 2021, the Winter is Coming edition of the show. And I'm sure a lot of people were coming after watching this particular event. Oh, come on, the joke was right there. Thought I wasn't going to jump on that one. Anyway, well, I certainly have a lot to say about this one. Particularly the match that should have been the main event of the show, but instead was the curtain jerker for the night. Obviously, that being the world title match. And I pretty much had the exact same thoughts about this as I did with the Danielson Omega TV match a couple months back. I don't get it. The card structure formatting made absolutely no sense to me, especially knowing damn good and well that nothing else on this show was going to follow that Paige Danielson match, regardless of how good to great the match would have ended up being in the first place. And as much as I like to give him shit, I know that even AEW is not stupid to think that anything else on this show would have followed that match. So, again, makes no sense to me. Seems like a completely backwards way of booking the show by putting your main event match on first, but of course, what do I know? I'm just a dumb fucking wrestling fan that's only been watching this shit for 25 odd years. So as noted, we begin with the only thing that mattered on the show. It is Hangman Adam Page versus Bryan Danielson for the World Championship. Tell you someone out of the gate that I did not miss on the show was Justin Roberts' ring introductions. And I will be completely transparent. When Excalibur welcomed back Roberts at the beginning of the segment, I had totally forgot he was ever gone. Justin Roberts is such an afterthought to me at this point. I never even noticed the dude was absent from television. But he was back, and boy, was he back with a vengeance. So this match, oh boy, where do I even start with this one? It's so frustrating. Watching this match live, I think I was able to finally craft my most fundamental general opinion that I have when it comes to this particular product. AEW is truly one of those wrestling companies that I can honestly say I have the most quintessential love-hate relationship with. Like, it's a lot different from the love-hate relationship I used to have with TNA years back. Watching TNA wrestling was like being in a never-ending abusive relationship. It's like no matter how good or bad things were, I always kept trying to rationalize reasons to suck myself back into the vortex of complete assholery that was always Impact Wrestling for 10 plus years. And in the back of my mind, I always knew the product sucked and they were never going to get past a particular point. Yet I always kept trying to validate some kind of lingering hope that things could potentially change. No matter how many different TV stations or management teams or production upgrades they went through as a company, the reality always eventually set in that it's still TNA, it's still Impact, and it still doesn't matter. And I know that's horribly brutal, but at the end of the day, it is a horribly brutal truth. And we all know it's true, especially looking at it in hindsight in 2021. But my point is this. My love-hate relationship with AEW is very unlike my relationship with TNA. I think I would chalk up my viewing experience with AEW these last 2 years as something on par with dealing with family drama or a younger sibling that's constantly pissing you off. They do so many small, immature things that stick in your craw and make you absolutely despise them at various points. But then the more you think about it, you have that lingering hope in the back of your head that they'll mature, it's a phase, they'll be more tolerable once they get older. That's basically where I stand with AEW at this point. They do a lot of stupid, outlaw, dumb shit, and they do so much stuff that pisses me off and rubs me the wrong way every week I watch this product. But it's like every once in a blue moon, they'll give me like 2 or 3 great things that keep me coming back, and they'll actually present me with something resembling professional wrestling that just makes me wonder, why the fuck can't they do this stuff 100% of the time instead of all the other dumb stuff they do every week? It's the most mind-numbing, hair-pulling frustration I can think of, but like I said, man, once in a while they'll throw me a bone to keep my hopes up. And once I managed to get past the whole facepalm of seeing them put this match in the opener, I watched the match, and when it was over, actually, I was even more pissed off that they put the match on first. As soon as we had approached about the 30-minute mark, I pretty much figured they're about to pull an Okada Omega here and have this fucker go Broadway. And I'll touch a little more on that at the end of the segment here, but let me cover some of my match details first. I really don't know if this can be argued or not. Maybe you can. If you want to debate it, you can tear me a new asshole in the comments for overlooking something for all I care, but I think this is Hangman Page's best match he's ever had. When I think back on some of Page's career highlights in AEW, I can't think of a singles match that I would put above this one he had here. And that includes his Full Gear pay-per-view match he just had with Kenny where he won the belt. Like, this was far and away superior to the match he had with Kenny, just in terms of, like, overall pacing and standalone professional wrestling. It was miles better than the inaugural world title match he had with Jericho from All Out a couple years ago. I think this is better than the match he had with Pac back in late 2019, I think it was. And again, sorry, a lot of these shows really start to blend together after a while. I remember he had a match with MJF a while back too that I thought was relatively good, but again, it could not hold a candle to Page's performance in this match with Danielson. In terms of just pure professional wrestling, I have never seen Hangman Adam Page perform at the exemplary level that he performed in this match with Danielson. Like, especially when it comes to just pacing and timing. And I understand with them going 60-minute Broadway, Page had a lot more time to really hone in and focus on those smaller details and not get so hung up on the moves part of the match. I thought Page's selling in this match was far and away the best I've ever seen from him. And I know Danielson had a lot to do with this, but this was probably the first Hangman Page match where I actually got invested in the story of him getting frustrated with Danielson. Like, I actually could follow some kind of emotional ride with him throughout the match. Especially during the early stages of the match where, like, Danielson was outmaneuvering and toying with Page and trying to get under his skin, constantly reverting to the ropes to force the breaks. And, like, each time they would keep panning on Page's facials, and, like, you could visibly see with each passing camera shot, Page was getting more and more flustered and more angry with Danielson's bullshit. Like, that was great work on all parties involved. Of course, as the match went along, they started working body parts, which was a nice way to kind of move that match into the next necessary shift or gear. And unlike in a lot of matches these days where guys will work a body part for like 2 or 3 minutes just to get heat, and then 5 minutes later they're back up on their feet running wild and no selling whatever body part the guy was working on. Like, both guys actually stayed on these body parts for extended periods of the time, and they actually worked the match around it. And they used it to tie into some of the key factors in their signature moves later on in the match. Like Page getting his right arm worked over, so then he would try for the spinning lariat toward the end of the match, but he wasn't able to knock Danielson off his feet. The juice spot with Danielson driving Page into the post right before the second or third commercial break. I can't remember which one it was, but that was a nice touch. And they actually got it right in this case by having the babyface be the one to do the blade job. Can't tell you how many times wrestling companies get that fucking detail wrong. Of course, we get to the last 5 or 10 minutes, and both guys are starting to crank it up to that final notch. They're selling the fatigue, and they're not getting overly cute with all the false finishes. And I did note that somewhere in here, that was one thing I genuinely appreciated about the layout of this match. They didn't overdo it with all the bullshit kickouts and false finishes. The match didn't need them, and I'm glad they didn't get too excessive with it. It was actually something I was worrying about going in. And of course, the big climax they built to here, and again, a rare instance in modern professional wrestling where they actually built to a fucking climax for a change. Here, Page and Danielson were scrambling on the mat, probably with like a minute and a half, 2 minutes to go, and Danielson's trying to get Page in the label lock. Page eventually fights out of the grip, decked Danielson with a spinning lariat, attempted to go for one last buckshot and ends up connecting with it, but the time expires right before Page can get the cover, which again was kind of predictable by the point we got to this stage in the match, but at least they didn't do the stupid WWE version of it where the guy gets on top mid-cover and then right before the ref's hand hits the mat, the bell rings. I always hate that finish. It always comes off so contrived and hokey, and no one ever gets the timing right enough on that. So I'm glad they just went for something simplistic here. Page hit the buckshot, and that was pretty much it. And there were a couple minor criticisms I had about the match, like in terms of moves and the stuff that they did. I probably think Page could have done without the moonsault press and the tope dives, especially the first moonsault he did, where like the camera was blatantly filming Danielson watching Page scale all the way to the top turnbuckle before doing the flip. Again, it's too choreographed, too fake looking, and unless you've got a good enough shot where you can keep the guy that's supposed to catch the guy doing the dive out of the frame entirely, I always hate that shit. It's not as bad as like the clustered mass of bodies that stand outside the ring in the mini circle jerk session to catch the guy doing the obligatory flip dive over the top rope, but it's on par with that. So, like I said, a couple small nitpicks in terms of stuff they did in the match, but by and large, the pros heavily outweighed any cons I can throw at it. This was easily the best AEW match I think I've ever seen, and I really loved that Cody Dustin Rhodes match a couple years ago. Whichever show that was in 2019. I think it might have been Double or Nothing. And, I mean, as good as the Danielson Omega match was in late September of this year, gotta be honest, I thought this was better. It was a different kind of match than the one Omega and Danielson had, but like as an overall story archetype and in terms of profile elevation, this match was a real career highlight for Adam Page. So while I could probably say the Danielson Omega match was more of a spectacle showcase, I think Danielson Page told a much better story, and I mean that's usually kind of the wrestling that I prefer at the end of the day. So now with all that comes the important question that, of course, no one's going to ask because we're going to get caught up in the roller coaster that was the match. Should Hangman Page's first title defense have ended in a 60-minute draw? God damn, it's a real shame I even have to ask that question after having watched the match, but again, I've got to try to be fair and impartial here as a critic. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it. It's like, after the journey and the build to Page capturing the world title and like essentially making him the focal point of your top main event scene for the last year or so, after finally having him dethrone Omega for the belt and making it to the top of the mountain as the man, was it right to have his first title defense end in a non-finish? I'm really torn on it. And I'm kind of leaning toward no as sort of a knee-jerk response, but on the other hand, I can't recall a world title match in recent memory where a top champion's first major title defense ended in some kind of non-finish. Like, obviously, you'll have instances over the years where the guys' first title reigns get cut short due to unexpected injuries and things like that, which, I mean, are really out of your realm of control. But when it comes to, like, strategic booking of having a top champion's first big title defense end in some kind of no contest, I can't recall if and when I've ever seen that happen. And if it's going to be used as leverage for a future storyline, then I can possibly overlook it and run with it. But upon further reflection a couple days after the fact, I'm still not sold that this is the best booking decision for Hangman Page. And especially when you factor in that everything they've done with him post-pay-per-view has been kind of lukewarm at best. I mean, aside from that great babyface promo in the showdown he had with Danielson on the Dynamite episode after Full Gear, Page has kind of been a complete afterthought on this show since then. I can maybe have gone along with the time limit draw decision here if Page had like even one or two successful title defenses prior to this match. But the whole idea of him, not being able to definitively get a clean win in his first major title defense, still pretty iffy for me. Especially if the idea is to keep the belt on him in the next couple months. So, there you have it. My 2 cents, if you will. And I'll go ahead and throw this out there too. I think you'll have a good chunk of the AEW crowd that'll probably not think so highly of the match. They might say the Danielson Omega time limit draw from a few months back was better. Maybe even they'll go on record and say the Omega Page title match in the pay-per-view was better. I mean, both of which I thought were great matches, and I mean, I currently have them jotted down here on a Word document for Match of the Year contenders, but again, I'm viewing this more from a perspective of story playing and profile elevation, and not just the whole strict nuts and bolts moves part of the match, which I think people get way too focused on a lot of the time. For the wrestling I like and the wrestling that I enjoy, this felt like an old school NWA main event style match, like a Sting Flair main event or a Flair Dusty main event title match. Probably not the most exciting AEW match if you're looking for the whole spectacle deal, but in terms of the kind of wrestling that I find the most enjoyable, this probably would be the poster child for everything I wish AEW would be, but I also understand for where we are in the business in 2021, probably can't always be. So that was AEW's Main Event Instant Classic, and we still had an hour in the show left. And as far as any follow-up with the Paige Danielson match, be it a promo segment, a brief altercation with the two still trying to go ham on one another, probably a rare instance where a backstage brawl may have been a wise decision to run with here. Even something as subtle as like a replay or a way for the announcers to recap and show highlights of the match and focus on it. Nope. None of it. There was absolutely zero follow-up, whatever. It's like it was there, it was done, and they moved on with the rest of too much shit going on wrestling. And because these people have absolutely no idea what they're doing, they follow said instant AEW classic with what, you might ask? A goofy comedy skit involving Bobby Fish, Adam Cole, and the Beta Bucks with horrible acting and shitty kazoo Christmas music. You talk about the ultimate way to kill any and all momentum and buzz I may have had for the remainder of the show following that title match. AEW could not have picked a more perfect group of complete fucking buffoons to just totally kill my mood for the rest of the show. Again, it is that love-hate relationship coming back into play. I don't even remember what was said in this skit. I think the Bucks may have threatened to molest and beat the shit out of Trent's mom or something. What fucking manly heels. At least they're not going with some kind of wacky Sue and minivan on a forklift match, which honestly I wouldn't put past the Beta Bucks if they're booking the fucking shit. Oh yeah, and Cole apparently has gifts for the Bucks next week. Pretty much guaranteed it's not going to be a blowjob. Unless Cole's the one giving it. We had Wardlow squashing Matt Sydal in short order. Yeah, remember when Matt Sydal was involved with one of AEW's key storylines with Dante Martin and Lio Rush? Yeah, me neither. They also did a quick afterbirth promo here with Shawn Spears getting a call from MJF and apparently sending Wardlow to pick up drinks to celebrate MJF's upcoming win in the main event. So that slow face turn is coming along very nicely. And again, I'll say it again, I can totally get behind lackey goofball accountability Shawn Spears over semi-stern upper card heel Shawn Spears. Somewhere in the show, we had the announcement of a Ty Conti Penelope Ford submission match for Rampage this Friday. Merry Christmas, everyone. We get to watch Penelope Ford potentially attempt to put Ty Conti in a Texas Cloverleaf or a figure four leg lock. I will get the popcorn ready for that forthcoming catastrophe. We also had Malachi Black pretending to be ominous. I don't know. I should point out, by the way, that Aleister Black actually used to be my favorite wrestler in NXT at one point. Just so you don't get the impression that I have some built-in hatred for him, I actually think Black is incredibly talented. It's just, everything he's done in AEW since he showed up has sucked 10 cocks. So then we had a women's match that I was mildly looking forward to, I guess. It is Serena Deeb and Hikaru Shida in, I guess, what was billed as a rubber match. I'm not really sure when their first match was, but I do vaguely recall the last match they had. Pretty sure that was the one where Deeb Pillmanized Shida's leg afterwards, and then Shida, of course, was back on TV working matches less than 2 weeks later. And watching this match, I couldn't really tell if the problem was that they had their time cut short or if they just generally were having a hard time getting the people into it, but yeah, this one really didn't work for me. You know, factor in again that I already saw the Danielson-Page title match, and it's the principle of bad show structuring. I like Serena as a talent, and, you know, I don't really have anything against Shida. She's not a bad wrestler, but seeing these two wedged in the middle of a show following a great championship title match was doomed from the onset. Certainly wasn't bad, but I don't think it ever reached a level of intensity that it probably should have for a rubber match. I particularly enjoyed Excalibur's commentary during this one, especially his studious line that Shida taking a neckbreaker on an exposed buckle was classified as, and I quote here, an unnatural angle. Fucking dweeb. By the way, not that this is of any importance at all, but can anyone explain to me what the hell was up with that mesh skirt legging thing that Shida was wearing? Like, at first I had thought it was some kind of wardrobe malfunction, but when I looked at it closer, it just looked like a side piece of her gear. I don't know, it was just really weird looking. I was actually afraid she was going to end up tripping over it when she was running and scaling up the ropes. It was just like hanging off the side of her pants. I was like, what the fuck is that? But, yeah, aside from that, finish was Deeb exposing the corner buckle pad. Shida ended up sending Deeb face first into it and rolled her up for the clean pin. There you have it. Like I said, not a bad match, but again, watching it, I couldn't help but thinking in the back of my head that this entire feud was honestly just a way to remind us that Deeb and Shida still have a job. Had a quick Varsity Blondes promo with Griff Garrison basically calling out Malachi to a fight. Short and sweet to the point, but it's actually pretty good. Obviously, Julia Hart's still selling the Mist thing, so she wasn't there. And Griff basically said that he was going to fight on her behalf. And Pillman Jr. was not too keen on it, but Griff's going to be the man in this situation. This is a hell of a little fiery babyface promo from Griff, too. Telling you, man, Varsity Blondes have something. Don't sleep on those guys. They've got a lot of upside. They just don't get booked right. And on this completely back-assward booking of a program, we have MJF and Dante Martin in the main event for the Diamond Ring gimmick. Of course, not before MJF took a few minutes to roast the Texas crowd. My favorite line in the whole thing actually was the line he said early on where he called out Punk last week in the Long Island show by saying that his only insult that he could come up with in a 10-minute time frame was calling out the same sports team over and over again. Which, looking back, it's not wrong. He also referred to Punk as the next Ryback, which probably stung like a bitch. Especially if you are privy to Punk's heat with Ryback. And again, in keeping with my theme of key issues that AEW needs to be cognizant of in 2022, that line kind of falls under the marketing to mainstream fans category. Obviously, most hardcore fans know who Ryback is. There might even be a string of former WWE fans watching this show that remember him, but I'm just, again, trying to think from a new viewer's perspective, people that haven't watched the show before, maybe have not watched a whole lot of WWE either. Like, for the people that don't know the whole backstory with Punk and Ryback, or just flat out don't know who Ryback is, period, this is one of those circumstances where, like, as a casual viewer trying to watch the show, it's just, I don't know. It's too insider. You know what I mean? I don't know. Just not really my flavor of heat, if you know what I mean. So we get the match, and honestly, I'm trying to think of the best way I can describe it up front. This was a solid opening show match that they decided to put in the main event. Yeah. I really don't know how else I can be any more blunt than that. It was fine. They tried to make this a Dante showcase piece, and some way it worked, and by and large, I don't think it was as effective as they wanted it to be. And we got a sequence about midway through the match where Dante just kept hitting a bunch of flip dives onto MJF while he kept rolling to the outside, like, to the point where it just kind of got ridiculous. I mean, like, come on. At no point MJF couldn't just fucking move out of the way. And I know I glossed over a little bit of the whole Dante Martin Team Taz swerve thing from the Gauntlet Battle Royal last week, and you know, I did that on purpose just to see how they would follow up with it on this week's show, since I knew Dante was already wrestling going in. And, I mean, they pretty much had the exact match I figured they would have. Ricky Starks ran in at the end, causes the distraction, and cost Dante the match, because he's a stupid fucking babyface. It's every paint-by-numbers WWE finish you've seen 1,000 times before. God, the booking of Dante Martin on this show over the last couple months is just beyond perplexing to me. Ever since the whole Leo Rush, Matt Sydal thing started, I haven't been able to figure out what the hell they're trying to go for with this whole Dante push. The closest thing they had going in the right direction with him was having him link up with Team Taz. Like, at least in the sense that it was an opportunity for them to do something to help Dante craft an actual character and learn how to be a personality on television. And then, for whatever reason, they decided to pull a Russo swerve and flip him back babyface without even exploring any new territory with him as a short-term heel. Now he's back to being just an ordinary dude that does kicks and flips. He's still a complete blank slate as a personality on this show, and honestly is in no better shape than he was before he started teaming with Sydal. I just have no idea what they're going for with him. And let's not bullshit. They have no idea what they're going for with him either. They're pushing him because he's got a few people that pop for him, and he does a couple cool athletic things in the ring. But I mean, dude's got personality, a drywall, and he ain't making any improvements riding solo. And I guess it really doesn't matter at the end of the day, because the whole post-match thing with FTR and MJF getting run off by Darby, Sting, and CM Punk to set up a six-man for next week's show. I mean, that pretty much leaves you with the realization that Dante Martin doesn't mean a whole lot. A complete blimp on the radar. I don't get it. It's just more that stop and start pushing they always do with their undercard guys. It's, we'll push them on TV for a little bit, and then we'll pull them down a notch, take them off TV, and then we'll put them back on and push them a little bit, but then we'll just do about 6 jobs, and then it'll just kind of be an afterthought. I mean, I probably can't do it now off the top of my head, but give me like 5 to 10 minutes. I could probably give you an entire list going off of AEW's roster of all the undercard talent they do this stuff with. I don't get it. I will say, though, that 6-man tag has the potential to be a hell of a tag match next week. And if the end result is Sting getting the much-needed pinfall victory over MJF to solidify himself as a future main eventer and world title contender down the road, I can get down with that. I've already kind of shared my overall thoughts on the show toward the beginning, but I'll basically close out the report with this. If these people had a fucking clue and knew how to construct an actual card from top to bottom, and they flipped the opener and the main event around and put the world title on match, or the world title match on last, like it fucking should have been, this would have probably been one of the best Dynamite shows of the entire year. Maybe you take out a couple of the pre-tapes in there, like I could have done without the Beta Bucks stupid skit and Malachi Black pretending to be Aragorn for 3 minutes. Instead, it was a moderately decent Dynamite show that just so happened to arguably feature their match of the year. I really wanted to say that this is the best Dynamite episode of the year, but when the Paige Danielson match was over and I realized I still had an hour left in the show, bro, my energy absolutely died for the rest of the night. And I can tell you, I wasn't exclusive to that, because that same thing happened with the crowd. I mean, they popped for a couple things here and there, but by and large, once hour 2 hit, these people were dead as a doornail. I still encourage anyone out there to watch that world title match between Paige and Danielson. Like, if you want a textbook example of what a real old school professional wrestling match can be when it's done right, that is the match to watch. I know it's asking a lot of people, especially sitting through a whole 60-minute ordeal, and I know that whole thing will leave people wavering, but contextually, that was one of the best real modern professional wrestling matches I've ever seen AEW do. Again, it's a toss-up between that and the Cody Dustin match from a couple years ago, just in terms of like pure drama and overarching story. I still don't think I enjoyed it more than the Walter Ilya Dragunov match, which was a completely different match with a completely different story. But I think when I look back in a couple weeks when I do my top matches of 2021, and we are going to dedicate a segment to this show here. I probably do that on the Monday show. I'll just run down my list of I think I have a top 20 list right now. And I'll just run down my top matches of 2021 and do a little brief analysis of those matches. But for sure, the Hangman Page Bryan Danielson world title match, it'll probably be either number 2 or number 3 on that list, easily. Fantastic work from both men. Danielson especially, that dude, he really is trying to be a modern-day Kurt Angle at this point. Just impressive work rate, and God, it's going to be such a huge letdown when that guy finally retires. I'll tell you what. So with that said, we will move on to our retro portion of the recap. We got NWA World Championship Wrestling from December 14th, 1985. We begin with Buddy Landell at the booth with Tony doing a promo on Magnum TA while sporting his best Ric Flair impersonation attire. And I'll be frank, I have very little recollection of any of his dialogue in this promo. I think his main point had something to do with the fact that the NWA has way too many goddamn belts, and the only real belt that matters is the national heavyweight title. And while I can't necessarily say I agree with the latter part, I can certainly attest to the part of the NWA having way too many belts around this period. It is interesting, though, on the subject of NWA champions, just how differently they handled the title pictures around this time. It's kind of hard to explain, but I think the best way I can sum it up is championship titles back in the day really used to feel like true tiered championships. Like the idea of undercard, mid-card, and upper-card belts actually met those criteria. But the important thing is that it never mattered if you were the television champion, the national heavyweight champion, a world tag team champion, U.S. heavyweight champion. guys were still always aiming to capture the belt that was at the higher status above where they currently were in the pecking order, like with the end goal ultimately being to capture the world title at the top. You just don't really get that vibe in modern wrestling today, especially with WWE, with mid-card titles that really aren't even true authentic mid-card titles anymore. The bastardizing of the Intercontinental title is a prime example of just a complete devaluing of a once true mid-card belt. A mid-card belt, actually, that used to pretty much guarantee that at one point or another you were going to be the world champion. Nowadays, if you aren't the world champion and you're carrying around a belt, you're carrying a prop. Your belt doesn't mean jack shit. And sorry, AEW fans, the same thing goes for the TNT title and the tag titles, too. So that was a real interesting takeaway I took away from that opening promo. Again, despite the fact that I literally had no idea what Buddy Landau was talking about here. Then Magnum TA killed Bill Tab with a belly-to-belly suplex, which was not as interesting, but pretty status quo Magnum match. And speaking of belts that used to have meaning, we had Arn Anderson talking up the fact that he is still the real unclaimed, uncrowned World's Television Champion, despite what Dusty and Jim Crockett Promotions may have people believe. And, trust me, when we're analyzing tiers of NWA championships around this time, television title was, easily one of the more bottom-ranking belts. And even a lower tier status title used to actually mean something, back in the day when guys used to be big enough stars to put over the significance of those belts. Anyway, coming back from a commercial break, hearing about all the pleasant side effects of Duplexant, or whatever it's called, we get this Ollie and Arne versus Rocky King Italian Stallion tag match. Again, really not a whole lot to report on it. Easy payday for the Italian Stallion in this one. Literally, all he had to do here was stand on the apron and look concerned for about 5 minutes while Rocky took the entire beating of the match and got pinned. Then we had Tully Blanchard taking on Gerald Finley, which, had its share of fair entertainment in a few short minutes it went. I got a kick out of Baby Doll lecturing senior referee Tommy Young on checking for Finley's shoulders being pinned to the mat. Gotta keep the professionals in check. Meanwhile, a minute later, Tommy's firing back at her going, "I have eyes, lady. Mind your own fucking business." Damn right, Tommy. Back when real men used to know how to put women in their place. Tommy was actually a boatload of fun to watch on this show, especially watching him interact with all the heels. Following this, we had, for lack of better terms, as I literally wrote down here, Magnum TA and Dusty Rhodes being Magnum TA and Dusty Rhodes. They're out at the booth with Tony, and they're dressed in these ridiculously oversized fur coats, basically doing everything they can to mock Ric Flair. And while I can see that Magnum looked completely out of place in this whole getup, Dusty was the only human being alive that could pull something like this off and make it look convincing. And we also got a little more foreshadowing here with Dusty vowing revenge on the Anderson brothers for breaking his ankle a few months back. And again, keep your eyes peeled with that whole angle, because Dusty was not ribbing when he promised brutality, pain, and suffering for the Anderson brothers. Following that, classic promo for the ages, with the Rock and Roll Express taking on Vernon Deaton and George South. Poor Deaton was having a rough night out of the gate on this one. Literally, his first two planned spots in this match included taking a basic arm drag takeover and getting taken out by Robert Gibson in one of those brief offensive flurries, both of which Deaton managed to fuck up royally. And we also had a spot about midway through where Ricky Morton was trying to do a quick comeback on South, which basically included a hard Irish whip into the corner, And coming out of the corner, Morton and South had a malfunction at the junction, as the famous Mauro Ranallo once coined. And this botch spot pretty much consisted of South and Morton engaging in a running man hug before Morton just spiked and dumped South on the floor. Not good. And I love me some Rock and Roll Express, but yeah, this sucked about 5 cocks. I'd still say it was moderately more tolerable than whatever passes for tag team wrestling these days, but I certainly would not pin this up as Ricky and Robert's finest performance. Following that, we had Ivan Koloff at the booth ranting about the crew refusing to hang up the Soviet flag in the rafters before the show. Then they showed some brief footage of the Road Warriors doing a run-in following a Russians tag match, which somehow abruptly ended up with Hawk getting hung over the ropes with a chain before they cut back to the ring. Gotta get that heat. And they kind of played this up later in the show with the Road Warriors promo, but they are essentially running with the story here that for the first time since Hawk and Animal arrived on the scene, the Russians are their first real challengers that are sort of on an equal playing field, which in turn accounts for all the heat angles they've been doing on the TV shows, with the Russians managing to always find ways to leave the Road Warriors laying. And especially when you factor in where they eventually go with Nikita in 86, I mean, it is great seeing their profile get elevated with each passing show. And speaking of the devil, Nikita Koloff took on Mac Jeffers. They actually pretty much did the exact same match as the previous Nikita match I reviewed, where Nikita killed the guy for like 99% of it. They do a quick deal at the very end where the job guy gets in a single hit on Nikita, and then he just fires back and lays him out with the Russian sickle. And this time, Nikita goes to pick Jeffers back up to his feet for another clothesline just to make sure he learns his valuable lesson of cashing in his one offensive strike in the match. Back to the booth with Tully and Baby Doll for another reminder promo from Tully that he never said "I quit" in the cage match with Magnum at Starrcade. And he argues that since Magnum likes to hide behind garbage wrestling gimmicks to win titles, if Magnum and Tully had ever engaged in a straight one-on-one contest again for the United States title, he would beat Magnum clean as a sheet. Great heel line. And I don't know, it was just really amusing. Tully's doing this really fiery, passionate heel promo. The only thing I could think the entire time it was going on, has Baby Doll always towered over Tully Blanchard in height? Or do they just put her in high heels or something for these promo segments? I don't know why. It's just very distracting watching Tully do this promo and Baby Doll is just kind of hovering over his shoulder in the background. For our Championship Challenge Series match, it is Crusher Khrushchev defending the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight title against Pistol Pez Whatley. And I wrote this down in my notes as probably the most accurate way to describe this match. This was the most lifeless, uneventful 10-minute nothing-happening championship match with one relatively fun minute of action at the end. Basically, here's a nuts and bolts breakdown of everything that happened here. Pez Whatley, the babyface, worked over Khrushchev's arm while the heel Khrushchev sold and sold forever. I can best describe it as monotonously boring. Then they cut back from commercial. Pez did this quick comeback on Khrushchev, which included a suicide tope of all things, at which point the crowd actually started getting into it for the first time. And as Pez goes to the pin, Ivan yanks on Pez's foot. Khrushchev immediately decks Pez with a sickle for the 3, which completely killed the crowd dead. And for those of you that are going to get on me and say, oh, well, so when AEW has 10-minute all-action spot fest matches, they're shit. But when you see it on the Superstation shows, they're fine then. Well, I'll put it to you like this. if you had to sit through a 10-minute match of nothing happening, rest holds and arm bars, and then out of the blue you get a babyface giving a heel a suicide dive to the outside, you'll take anything relatively exciting you can get at that point. It's seriously, at this point in the match, Pez could have given Khrushchev a running power slam out of the corner. It would have gotten a pop out of me. Like, by the point we got to the 9-minute 45-second mark of let's just lay here on the ground and just not do anything constructive, I was just praying for someone in the audience to hit the ring just to bring some energy to the building. At least next week's Championship Challenge Series match is a 6-man, so we will probably not have extended periods of nothing happening holds on the ring mat where they're actively trying to run out the clock. Road Warriors smashed Paul Garner and Larry Clark in a short deal. We were informed a minute into this match that Hawk and Animal were refusing to pin Garner because, and I quote here, Paul Garner is wearing red, and the Road Warriors associate that with the Russians. Despite the fact that the Road Warriors were out here sporting red imprinting. And, well, it wasn't until after the Road Warriors got the pin where I actually rewound it to the beginning and realized I don't think we ever got an opening bell to this match. So let the record show that in the year 2021, Paul Garner and Larry Clark still have an active case for the fact that the Road Warriors did not officially beat them in a tag team match. Had another quick Ollie Arne promo where I think Arne referred to Dusty and Magnum from earlier as looking like two oversized twin koala bears. And aside from that, Arne still wants the TV title. Just in case we didn't pound that into your head earlier. Sam Houston had a match with Mike Nichols. Best part of this entire thing was David Crockett's announcement that we would be getting the Barbarian and Paul Jones up next. I almost peed myself. I was so excited. And, well, again, I wrote down here, fans providing their most kind gesture towards Sam of chanting Bulldog in order to essentially push him to wrap the fuck up with this match in the last minute or so. I actually kind of thought the finish was cool, though, with Nichols doing the rope reversal on Houston, but then Houston came back and catches Nichols with the Bulldog for the 3. Then we get my new favorite pairing on this show, and especially after that banger of a promo on last week's show, we get Paul Jones and the Barbarian at the booth. And this week, Jones has a dream, just like Martin Luther King Jr. did. And that dream is to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Barbarian is the strongest man in all the land. And Tony, of course, selling this perfectly at the end, where after Jones is doing the raging, ranting, steaming, spitting promo, just practically on the verge of having a heart attack on live national television. Honestly, I thought Jones was about to do the Flair flop at one point. Shivani, total straight face, just casually goes, "Alrighty then, let's get back to the ring." Fucking love this show. So after that instant classic from the man, myth, legend Paul Jones, we got not an instant classic between the Raging Bull and Kent Glover. And again, this may just be like historical ignorance on my part, but the whole booking of Fernandez on this show is so confusing right now. Like I said last week, I know he ends up turning heel sometime in 86, but his matches on the show right now are sort of towing the line of him working as a more frustrated babyface without going full-fledged heel, and I don't know, it's very odd. And it's also kind of making the crowd more apathetic toward him and watching him wrestle on the show. They aren't really reacting to him. They're kind of languid during his matches, and they don't really have much of an investment in his character. You know, David spent most of the match here playing up the idea that Fernandez was getting pissed that Glover wasn't putting up a fight, so Fernandez was sort of punishing him as a way to, I don't know, fire him up or something. Like I said, it's just really strange. I don't really know what they're going for here. Like I said, unless it's part of a huge plot to tease a heel turn a year out from when it actually happens, but whatever. So they follow that relatively boring and dull match with a surefire way to wake up the crowd at this point. They put Ronnie Garvin at the booth. Well, I will at least say this. He was blunt enough to state, "I've never been much of a talker." Huh. You don't say, Ron. Never would have been able to piece that one together. Anyway, basically talked about the fact that he's been at a standstill for a while, but he wants to throw his name back in the hat for title contention, and he's issuing a challenge to Buddy Landel. Yeah, about that one. We have the Barbarian killing Alan Martin in a very entertaining squash. Even David Crockett was geeking out over the brutal ass whipping that Barbarian was giving this poor Martin fella. Which, let's be frank, was something that the show desperately needed at this point, was something to brighten the crowd. And, well, honestly, what the show really needed was a Ric Flair promo, but we unfortunately did not get him on the show this week. But I will take a Barbarian beatdown match any day of the week. And again, I know things go horribly off the rails with Paul Jones and the Barbarian in 86, like especially once we get to the whole Paul Jones Army saga, and blech. Not really looking forward to talking about that whole debacle. But at this point in the whole pre-Horseman era of NWA, this whole late 85 period of NWA World Championship Wrestling, Paul Jones and the Barbarian have been the sole highlights of this show, bar none. We got the Road Warriors back out once again to vow death and destruction on the Russians. And our main event match was Ronnie Garvin taking on Al Scott. Yeah, as you've probably been able to tell, this wasn't a particularly stellar edition of NWA World Championship Wrestling this week. At least we had a semi-decent rock and roll promo to close out the show and send people home somewhat happy. Which honestly may have been a last-minute throw-in with Crockett saying, "God, the show sucked a cock this week. Hey, Ricky, Robert, go out there and say something positive to make the people smile." And by that I mostly mean, Ricky, go say something positive to make the people smile, and Robert, just stand there and try not to say anything of any substance or put anybody into a coma. And as was the case with virtually every rock and roll promo from 1985 until whatever year they eventually faded out as full-time workers, like 97, 98. Pretty much it was a status quo rock and roll promo. Ricky would do about 95% of the stick work, and if Robert did ever say anything, they pretty much made sure they didn't feed him the mic for any more than 30 seconds, which was always a good call. And one thing that has become abundantly clear as we analyze the whole wrestling business around the December time frame, whether it's modern professional wrestling or classical wrestling, the Christmas season is usually about the point where companies are phoning in the programming and saying, no one's watching anyway, so what you get is what you get. This was a relatively piss-poor show, and, I mean, on top of anything, the promos were kind of off this week in comparison to usual. And if you're doing any kind of watch-along at this point and you haven't gone back to check out this edition of NWA WCW, do yourselves a favor, take my word for it. It ain't worth to sit through. Even the Paul Jones promo is honestly not worth the watch. But moving on to a slightly better show in the retro series for the week, that brings us to World Class Championship Wrestling from December 18th, 1982. With the featured match of the night being the long-awaited rematch between David Von Erich and the Great Kabuki for the All-Asian Heavyweight title. And of course, they show the pre-tape beforehand with the Dragon doing the run-in in the first match between the two, just to set that up in advance. Killer Tim Brooks versus Brian Diaz in the opener. And continuing along with the running theme for a lot of the world-class wrestling TV matches around this point, relatively boring to decent matches with totally fucked up finishes that leave you bewildered and confused in the end. And this one was pretty much no different. Brooks and Diaz are doing very standard pro wrestling. It's every paint-by-numbers match you see in the book. And, I mean, it's going along relatively fine per 1982 standards. And we fast forward to the finish. Brooks cradles up Diaz near the ropes. Brooks reaches out to grab the middle rope while David Manning was counting the pin. And, well, initially we're led to believe that Brooks won. And then, right as they're about to cut away, Bronco Lubick runs in, and he starts pleading his case that Brooks cheated using the ropes. And because this is 1982, where if babyfaces by and large didn't win their matches, the fans would legitimately riot, Manning just decides, all right, fuck it. Diaz is the winner via because I said so. Very strange times when you look back at some of these baffling finish decisions from back in the day. All the while, I thought things had totally gone off the rails once we got to the Nitro era of wrestling in the late 90s, where you started seeing guys pinning guys who weren't even involved in the match. But let the record show that even in the year 1982, inexplicable, confusing finishes were not totally off the table. Anyway, so following that, we had a couple brief interviews to hype up the main event between David and Kabuki. And the story they were playing up here with the heels is that they were alleging that David's sleeper hold is actually a modified choke. I think I need to create my own little wrestling gif and title it, Heels Gonna Be Heels. So, of course, you had Gary Hart and Armin Hussein out ringside doing a confirmation bias promo, which was just awesome. And, of course, David's follow-up promo was something to the effect of, I learned that sleeper from the best of the best, i.e. his father Fritz. And if Hussein wants to figure out whether or not his finisher is a sleeper or a choke, he can carry his little hiney down to the ring and experience it firsthand. And, yes, I believe he actually did use the word hiney. God. Different times. We had the Checkmate and the Magic Dragon taking on Bugsy McGraw and Al Madrill. Could have sworn I recapped this exact same match just a couple weeks ago. Although they did air a pre-tape beforehand showing the little incident with Checkmate giving Al Madrill the dreaded foot stomp of doom a few weeks back, which had apparently knocked him out cold, and I vaguely remember that match after having seen that clip, but I think Checkmate's partner in that match was Wild Bill Irwin. Of course, the highlight of this entire thing was Bugsy, who can literally garner a reaction out of the crowd by doing nothing but standing on the apron doing Bugsy mannerisms. An amazing man. Match was pretty formulaic, though, with Madrill taking the extended heat beat down and giving Bugsy the big hot tag to make the comeback at the end. I did note here, a real missing art of tag team wrestling matches in the modern era. Heels doing actual, authentic, dastardly heel tricks behind the ref's back without making it come across as overly choreographed. And the best example I can note in this spot particularly was the part where Bugsy had a handful of Checkmate in the corner, and the ref was trying to separate those two and get Bugsy back into his corner. And meanwhile, Dragon sneaks in from behind and takes down Madrill quickly enough to where the camera actually missed filming it, doing the run-in. Just like, Small details. But like notice how whenever heel teams do these kinds of heat spots in today's business, the camera is always right on top of filming them in perfect position, like they know it's coming. Again, just very minute things that I can nitpick, but just you see the way the business has evolved over the years and how certain elements of the business have just kind of gotten lost in the shuffle, and this one really stood out to me here. We had the lovely yet completely apathetic female blonde back in studio for this one. Dude, I get a kick out of watching her. I should start making a gif of her reactions just to showcase basically everything during my AEW reports whenever I see something completely absurd or outright dumb. I'll pin up a JPEG photo of the totally disinterested hot woman from the world class surrounded by this mob of fired up fans cheering every god blessed thing that goes down in the ring. And I'll label the crowd AEW fans, and the female blonde will just be me sitting on my hand shaking my head at the stupidity. I know, sorry. Just anytime I can take a jab at AEW, I make sure I jump on it. Like I said, I love trolling. What can I say? Finish was actually pretty cool here with Madrill giving Checkmate a surprise sunset flip roll-up from the top rope while he had Bugsy on the mat. I wrote down, holy shit, Al Madrill did something of substance on this show for a change. Following that, we had a rapid series of interviews with a whole bunch of guys talking about the Kerry Von Erich Ric Flair title match next week. They had a nice balance of faces and heels here to basically make the case that the match can go either way, which, is good in keeping up excitement level for the match. Bugsy, of course, having the most entertaining promo of the bunch by simply informing us that the will to win is not as important as the will to prepare to win. And he also let us know that excitement is in the air, baby. I should also note that hearing Checkmate speak for the first time on this show was mildly humorous. They also re-aired the Fritz Flair showdown from last week, which I'm not going to recap because I already talked about it last week. But I will leave you with the fact that having watched it a second go-around, it is still as fantastic watching it a second time as it was the first time. And that brings us to our main event, David Von Erich taking on the Great Kabuki. Really not a whole lot to say about the action. Most of Kabuki's matches on the show consist of nerve and pinch holds, which I can only imagine how difficult it must have been working with Kabuki with guys that were particularly ticklish. Like, literally, there's a spot in this match where Kabuki grabbed David's armpit. That's literally all he did. And I can admit that if that had been me in that match, I probably would have burst out uncontrollably laughing. But really the only thing that mattered in this one was the stuff that happened in the last few minutes. David ended up bumping Bronco, which allowed for Hussein to get on the apron and try to restrain David so Kabuki could mist him in the face. But with impeccable timing, David managed to escape Hussein's grip, and Kabuki caught Hussein with the mist instead. And unlike Malachi Black, Kabuki actually made physical contact with the mist to his intended target and didn't completely whiff it to the point where it just looks bad. Maybe Black would benefit from watching some old world-class tapes to learn how to effectually do the mist spot. It would do him wonders. Again, though, we circle back to the whole mantra of WTF finishes here, where Bill Mercer tries to claim that David Von Erich is the new All-Asian Heavyweight Champion, despite the fact that the match was thrown out and David did not score a visual pin over Kabuki. So, I guess DQ finishes still counted as title switches back in the day. Or maybe Bill just fucked up. Probably betting on the latter. Still a fun little main event match, though. Yeah, the whole deal with Hussein selling the mist afterwards was a good follow-up touch. Again, back when they actually played up the mist as some kind of harmful chemical instead of just paint coloring like they do today. Good stuff this week, though. I actually would probably reiterate what I said at the end of my recap on last week's episode. Skip over the opening match and watch everything afterwards. And as we do prepare for the big cage showdown between Flair and Kerry, let me lay out the format for my plan on next week's Friday show. I will be talking extensively about the Flair-Kerry cage match from the Christmas Star Wars show. Unfortunately, the entire show is not up on the Peacock library right now, so I do not have access to watching the whole show in its entirety. But I do have access to the world title match, which, I mean, again, let's be honest, it's the only thing that really matters on this show. So the plan is to do the usual rundown of AEW Dynamite. We'll talk about World Championship Wrestling, NWA. And then we will close out by doing an in-depth analysis of the Flair-Kerry cage match. Because there's a lot that goes down in that match, and I want to make sure I allot enough time to discuss the importance of that match in detail, especially for the stuff that would come in years to follow. But that is for next week's Friday show. I will be back on Monday for the usual Rampage, Power, and Chairshot Article report. And our Chairshot Article this weekend focusing on the two newest free agents on the market right now, Kyle O'Reilly and Johnny Gargano. Or Gargano, depending on how you pronounce it. And we'll do a little deep dive on where they could possibly end up going into the new year and the implications of those decisions. The answers might not be as simple as you think, especially for a guy like Johnny. But that is for Monday. If you guys want to stay posted for future FSWR content, make sure you subscribe, keep that bell notification icon turned on, and please give this show a like and a comment down below to help me out in the algorithms. And again, as always, you can check out the show on Rumble by clicking the link in the description below. Take care, all. Peace out.